When my daughter was born, a woman who lived in our neighborhood gave me a coffee mug. This was not a new mug by any means. It had clearly been used before. It looked like she'd picked it up at a yard sale or a flea market or something. And it was one of those mugs that had a cartoon on it. And the cartoon showed a man bottle feeding a baby. The only problem is the man seems so absorbed in the sporting event on TV that he's got the kid upside down and the bottle's in the wrong end. And beneath the cartoon, it says, "New Dad." Now, I have no doubt that the person who gave me that mug thought it was funny. I did too. I've still got it, and one day I shall pass it on to someone else. But on the other hand, there is the part of me that resents the message of that mug. It's a symbol to me of society's subtle and not so subtle assertion that men cannot adequately care for their children. When my daughter was in diapers, we'd be out in public, and there were many, many times when that diaper needed changing, and so I'd change it. And too often it would happen that somebody, usually a woman, I'm sorry, would make a comment implying that maybe I didn't know what I was doing. I knew what I was doing. But this was a pretty consistent comment. Being a father is difficult, just as being a mother is difficult. And in recent years, there's been a wealth of studies emphasizing the crucial role that a father especially has in the happiness and well-being of his children, especially the girls. For example, according to the experts, my daughter's relationship with her future husband will be dependent on how I treated her growing up. That's a lot of pressure. Or I could be the cause of her developing an eating disorder, and the list goes on and on. I am happy to announce, however, that today is my daughter's birthday. She's 24 years old, and by all account, she's doing very well. I do know she was up late last night, so I don't think she's out watching right now. But if she is, I want to wish her a happy birthday. But even after 24 years, I'm still struggling to be a good father, and occasionally I think I am. I have a favorite story. Recently, she called me up to say that she had no hot water in her apartment, and she had called the maintenance office, and they hadn't responded yet, and she didn't know what to do. So I said, "Is the water heater gas or electric?" She didn't know. So I said, "Send me a picture of the water heater." It was electric. So I told her to remove the top panel. She did. I told her to press the red reset button. She did, and it clicked. Success. Yay me. Our scripture reading for today is the first of two passages on Abraham, and specifically Abraham's fathering skills. In the first story, Abraham abandons one son in the wilderness in an attempt to appease his wife, and in the second story, Abraham almost kills his other son in a ritual sacrifice to appease his God. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that Abraham is actually the world's worst father, but his parenting skills certainly put mine into perspective. As you'll recall, as we've talked over the past couple of weeks, Abraham and Sarah were a couple called by God to go to a land that God would show them. God promised that their descendants would become a great nation of people, and that their names, Abraham and Sarah, would be a blessing to all the families of the earth. As I pointed out last week, there was a problem with this plan, and that was that Abraham and Sarah were well into their 70s and had never had children. So we're not sure where these descendants are coming from. The odds of her getting pregnant at that age were about the same as me jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. Not going to happen. Nevertheless, Abraham and Sarah pack up their belongings and their servants, and they migrate south. When they arrive in the land of Canaan, God instructs them to stop there and this was the land where they were to reside. They make this place their home. Because God had promised these descendants, and because of her age and the unlikelihood that she would ever have a child, Sarah urges her husband to have a child with Hagar, their servant woman. Abraham agrees, and Hagar gives birth to a son, and they call him Ishmael. Later on, Abraham and Sarah are famously visited by strangers who turn out to be angels, messengers from God. And the strangers inform the couple that Sarah would soon carry a child. She overhears this conversation. We all know what she does. You remember? She laughs, yes. Because that is totally ridiculous. A, that she's going to have a child. B, that it's going to be announced by three men who just wander down the road. But she does become pregnant, and she has a child, whom she names Isaac. And what does Isaac mean? Laughter. After her laughing at the prospect of becoming pregnant. And so that brings us up to our reading for today. So Abraham now has two sons, one from his wife, one from his servant. And that promise of a nation of descendants is starting to look up. But Sarah, the wife, is jealous. She observes Ishmael playing with Isaac, and she demands that Abraham remove Hagar and her son. She does not want Ishmael to encroach on her son's inheritance. And Abraham now has a dilemma. I mean, really, because which son is first? Is it the firstborn, who is the child of his concubine, or the secondborn, who is the child of his legitimate wife? And he loves both of them. And we are told that Abraham is distressed at what Sarah has ordered him to do. But God speaks to Abraham and tells him not to be troubled, that it will be all right. He is to do what Sarah tells him because it is through Isaac, her son, that a nation will be named for Abraham. But Ishmael will have a nation of people of his own as well. So the next day, Abraham packs some bread and a canteen of water. He gives these to Hagar and sends her and the boy out into the wilderness, where they wander until the water is gone. And at that point, knowing that the end is near, Hagar places her child in the shade of a bush and walks away. She walks far enough that she cannot hear the child cry, and she herself weeps. But God hears the cries of the child and sends an angel to reassure Hagar. The angel tells her to go and to take up the child and hold him by the hand. For in fact, God is going to make a great nation of him. And then she does that. And she looks up, holding her child, and she sees that there is a well nearby. And so she goes over and she draws water, and the two of them drink. And we are told then that God is with this boy, and he grows up as a man in the wilderness, and eventually his mother, who you remember was Egyptian, finds him an Egyptian wife. Now, I gotta admit, I really don't like this story. And then the one we'll look at next week, the one about the almost sacrifice of Isaac, I like even less. Because here we have a father who seeks to end the life of his child, and I don't care what the reason is. It's an abhorrent thing to do. It's abhorrent to think that Abraham will cast these two people, Hagar and her son, out into the wilderness like that. And that word cast is very specific. It is the same word which is used to describe what Joseph's brothers will do to him when they cast him into a pit. Their intent in doing that was his death. Abraham's intent, casting these two into the wilderness, was that they would be gone forever. And it would appear that Abraham knew that Ishmael would suffer the same fate when he was cast out. So how is it that we arrive at this point in this abhorrent story? What led Abraham to commit this act? Well, we say that his wife told him to do it, but we can look beyond that, because the real answer here is scarcity. Sarah, who ordered her husband to remove Ishmael from their lives, was afraid that there just wasn't enough for her son and for Ishmael. But enough of what? What was she afraid of? Well, what Sarah says to Abraham is, cast out this woman with her son, for the son of this woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. But inherit what? Well, it could be that she doesn't want her son to lose out on the inheritance of Abraham's property, his possessions, his flocks. Abraham was by this time wealthy. But I believe it's more than that. I believe that Sarah is most concerned about the blessing that God had promised them. Earlier, when God called Abraham and Sarah, God said, I will make of you a great nation and I will bless you. And it would seem that Sarah is fearful that if Ishmael is around, that Isaac's inheritance of God's blessing will be diminished. And that is a fear that is shared by so many people. The fear that God's love and God's blessing are limited. That there's only so much to go around. That the strategic reserves of God's love will be used up and that we will be left with nothing. That God's love is like gold or oil or Beanie Babies. And isn't that what we fear? And isn't that why we feel we must hoard God's love in order to preserve it for ourselves, to keep it for ourselves, and not let others get hold of it and take away what is ours? And so to protect her son's portion from being divided with Ishmael, Sarah plots to get rid of the competition. And she succeeds. But God has other plans. Although Hagar and Ishmael are cast out into the wilderness to die, we read that God hears the voice of the boy. And that word heard or hear is special because it is closely related to the word in Hebrew, Shema. And Shema is the same word that we find in that Jewish prayer, Hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And what we see here is that God hears, Shema's, the cry of the boy, because God is engaged in active listening. God wasn't doing something else when he just happened to hear the boy's cry. It's not like when I'm sitting out on the patio reading a magazine and I just happen to hear a siren in the distance. No, God is actively listening for the boy. The angel who comes to Hagar tells her, do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. And I love that last part, where he is. In other words, the boy did not come to God, but God listened for the voice of the boy. And then the angel reveals God's intent, and that is to make a great nation of him. And all of this is a reminder to us that the Ishma of Ishmael is related again to that word here, because Ishmael means God will hear. In the end, we have two great nations, one for Isaac and one for Ishmael. And God's love and blessings, we learn, are not limited to one or the other, but God's love and blessings are infinite. There is no scarcity. There is no shortfall. There is abundance for all. Ishmael would indeed become the ancestor of the people known as the Ishmaelites. And to the people of the Muslim faith, Ishmael is regarded as a prophet and a messenger. He is truly a great nation. And that is the truth of our faith, that God's love is endless. And not only that, that God is listening to each of us, listening for our cries. There is no scarcity. The scarcity exists only in our heads. When God promised a great nation, that didn't mean that it was the only nation. The only thing we need to fear is our own fear. So I invite you, as you reflect upon this story of Ishmael and Isaac and these great nations of people, to celebrate the boundless love that our God has for each of us. Amen.